Hello, welcome. Just taking a minute to get set up. We will start at 7.
Can you hear me, Whitney?
Yes, I can hear you, but it looks like your video is not turned on yet.
Yeah, I tried it and it said you won't allow me.
Let's see. What if I make you co-host? Will
Yeah,
that
make me a
change it?
co-host. That should do it.
Okay, perfect.
There we
Oh,
go.
there you are.
Hello.
Hi.
You're outside.
Yes, on my porch. It's very nice out. It's starting to
Yeah,
cool off a bit.
it's going to get dark on you.
Yeah, I'm hoping it'll hold out. Maybe I should turn my porch light on just in case. It's a good idea.
Okay.
So where are you coming to us from?
Southeast Pennsylvania.
Oh, nice. Very nice. Carol should be joining us soon.
Okay.
We have PA, New York, and Ohio covered because I am in Cleveland.
Oh, okay. Nice day out there.
Yeah, it was very hot today, actually. It was in the upper 80s, but it has started to get more mild now. So, yeah.
We had misty rain clouds all day. Again.
Yeah, it's been like that here, you know? Like it's moving into fall, I guess.
Yeah. Well, this has been a really wet summer for us. All summer long.
Really?
Yeah.
That's interesting. It has not been too wet here. It's been hot. It's been a hot summer. But
Well, now that you know I'm here, I'm going to take my headphones off and I'll be right back.
sounds good.
Hey, lady.
Hey.
It says I can't start my, oh, there we go. Never mind. I got it. Ooh.
Cool. Doug is here and good. He just went to go do something, but his audio is good and he was good. So.
Okay.
Can you see any paper in my camera view?
No.
Okay. Cool. Right, and then I just need to keep an eye out for Tracy to make her a co-host as well. Hi, Karen. Hello, Sydney. If you are already watching, we will get started at 7. You're welcome to stick around until then. But if you want to get food or drink or step away, we won't actually start until 7 o'clock.
Kids. That's all I'm going to say.
Jack's screaming in the house, but you can't hear it out here, but you can hear the chainsaw, so.
Oh.
Hopefully that will stop soon.
I can't really hear it.
Oh, good. That's good, because my neighbor is cutting up a fallen tree, and I should tell him to leave it.
That's right.
What is it, a scrag? Scrag?
A snag.
Snag. Snag, there we go. How were your site visits?
Good. I didn't have any today. That was yesterday.
Yesterday.
Yes, and I have 2 tomorrow. So
good.
And they went well. Actually, I had 3 yesterday. What am I saying? 3 yesterday. So
awesome. I can't believe how many people you've seen. It's crazy.
I know. I'm actually feverishly working on. I was working on a design, and then I looked up at the time. I'm like, oh gosh, I've got to get on. So that's why I was 5 minutes late. I'm like, oh boy.
Oh, you were fine. I was sitting here with mine all on, and then realized that I couldn't even see you or Doug unless I broadcast it. So so I hope he wasn't sitting waiting. But
well, I thought he originally said he was going to come on at 6:45. So
yeah,
he probably wasn't waiting too long.
Yeah, hopefully not. Hopefully not.
Yeah. So did it cool off for you once the sun went down?
It's starting to. It's still 80, but but it feels better. It's not good. Sunny. So hopefully if it starts to rain, I'll have to run. But,
make a dent.
Yeah. I guess I have an umbrella, but here we
Hello,
go.
Carol.
Hi, Doug. How are you? Nice to finally meet you in person.
Yeah.
Or in person.
I know, in person.
This is as in person as we get these days.
Exactly. Thank you so much for this. We are so excited. Thank you.
Yes, we are.
You're welcome. I hope you're still excited at the end.
Oh, I'm sure.
I am sure, yeah. So what our plan is I will introduce you. I'm going to take just a second to talk about the programs that your research has influenced, that we have going, and then I'll introduce you, and then you can take it away and present. And then when you're finished, we will open it up to questions, and that will be you fielding. We'll read the questions to you. We wanted to make sure that's what you wanted, was for us to read them aloud.
Yeah, that works best, I think.
I think so too. That way the participants don't have to be following along in the box or anything.
Right.
So Carol will read them aloud to you, and then I will, when you're finished going through questions, I will do a little wrap up and sign us off. And I'll take care of the spotlighting so that it'll just be you. When you're talking, will be small. And then the only time Carol would field a question is if somebody specifically asks something about one of our CWC programs. She'll jump in and answer that, but otherwise I think it'll be primarily you answering the questions. Yes. And yeah.
Sounds good.
Cool. Hi, Tracy. I know you're muted, but hi. Thank you for your help.
Yes,
Tracy's
thank
going
you.
to be dealing with the Facebook Live side of things. So,
Oh, right.
yes, so she is helping
Yeah.
us out.
Hey guys.
Hey, Trish.
I know I don't see the option on the bottom. Can you see it? I don't know. Maybe you can see it. What?
So for mine, it's the ... more. So if that's not there for you, I can hit it. That's no problem.
Yeah, I don't. The recording thing is there. I don't know if maybe it's not because I'm not like the host in this one.
Maybe. Well, that's no problem. I think I can hit it, no problem. I'll probably try turning it on like 5 minutes before we get started.
That works.
And then hopefully you'll be able to see it and pull all the questions, hopefully.
Yeah.
You know.
Good idea to do that outside, Wet. I like your background.
Thank you. Yeah, it's nicer than my house. Nicer than inside the house.
And it looks pretty.
It does look pretty.
Thank you. Yes, I was telling Doug that we have a lot of states represented here, with him being in PA, me in Ohio, and you guys in New York.
That's right.
And where are the listeners from?
All over. So we put it out on to our constant contact. We put it out on Facebook, Instagram, email blasts. So hopefully all over the place.
Right.
Yeah, I should invite people to let us know where they're from in the chat.
So Doug, I heard you say that you guys had a rainy summer?
Yeah.
Really?
2 weeks ago, we had 11 inches.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Wow. He's in PA. You must have gotten that tropical storm that came up the coast?
It
Part
was
of
one.
it?
Yeah. So it wasn't Laura. It was before Laura.
Oh, okay.
And New England's dry, so things have kind of come to us, gone out to sea, and not gone out that far.
Yeah.
But every other day, yeah, thunderstorm, 2 or 3 inches.
Wow.
It's crazy.
No, I think we're at least 1 inch to 2 inches below normal out here.
We're dry and hot this summer.
I don't know what our total is. It's funny. You'd think that'd be easy to find online, but I always struggle. How much rain did we actually get? I don't know. Find everything else, but and it's spotty. I mean, I live in Oxford, Pennsylvania. I was actually in town trying to mail a manuscript the other day, and it rained so hard I couldn't even get to the car. I mean, it was up over the curb and everything else, and I drove home 5 miles, not a drop.
Wow.
We did have a doozy of a storm last Thursday. Yeah.
Yeah, that's when it was. It was Thursday. Yeah.
Yeah, I was driving from Cleveland to Western New York for our annual meeting, and I pulled into my parents' driveway. I ran around the car to grab my baby, and we didn't grab any of our luggage. We sprinted in the house, and sure enough, 1 minute later, it looked like the trees were all going to fall over, and the power was out. And yeah, that was a good storm.
Yeah. We almost didn't have the annual meeting.
Yeah.
Lost power. Yeah.
Yeah, it was poor timing for the power outages.
Yeah.
Welcome to the 4 of you who are already here. We will be five of you. Welcome. We'll be getting started in about 13 minutes, right at 7. Yeah, it'll be fun to see how many people come out tonight. Hopefully a lot.
Yeah.
What are you guessing?
My hopeful guess is 100. I don't know
Okay.
though.
I know.
We'll see. We for our webinar and for our annual meeting, we were hovering right around 60. But I think that you should draw a bigger crowd than both
Right.
of those.
Then
I think you're more exciting than both of those. That's what I should, I guess, say. But so I'm hopeful that we'll get a bigger turnout. But
We'll see. Well, we got 9 so far, so we're well on our way.
yeah, that's great. You never know. I feel like it just depends on how you hit people with everything being virtual. It's
Yeah.
so funny. Have you been doing a lot of webinars this summer?
Yeah, more and more. And it's, now it's not summer anymore, so
right.
Oh, that's true.
it's really picked up. Yeah, it'll be maybe about 3 a week. So
Wow.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yes.
keeps me hopping. Plus Zoom teaching.
Well, I was going to ask you, is that what the University of Delaware is doing? Are they going back?
Well, they call it hybrid. So if you have a lab or something like that, then you're in person. But most classes are online, including mine. And I don't know how many students are actually here, but I had my first class today. It was okay. Yeah.
It was okay.
Yeah.
So
we're getting used to it. That's what it boils down to. But
so what class are you teaching?
it's a graduate class. It's called Advanced Ecology.
Nice.
Kind of a review of the classic literature.
Oh.
It's a discussion class, and I wanted to do it in person, but then when I saw all the rules that the university has for in-person classes, I wanted to do it outside with no masks, where we could, be real people. No, can't do that. Got to have a mask. There's no way I'm going to talk in a mask for 3 hours. I'm just not going to do it. I can wear them as long as I'm not breathing and talking.
But, a lot. It's a long time.
It's hard.
I'm really claustrophobic about it. So I said, nah, we'll do it online. And plus one of the students complained immediately, oh, too dangerous to be in person. Whatever, but we're not, so.
Right.
I'm sure that's challenging.
Yes.
Welcome everyone that's tuning in. We'll get started in about 10 minutes. If you want to grab your water or your wine. Got my water.
The wine's a good idea, yeah.
I wish it was wine. This is where my water is.
I know.
There it is.
I got mine too.
Cheers. Some familiar names popping up. Welcome, welcome. I sent a message in the chat. If anybody wants to let us know where you're joining from, we would love to know. All right, Tracy, I'm going to go ahead and click the button and see what happens. Hopefully. Welcome, Christine from Sherman. Happy you're here. We're going to see how this goes with clicking this button.
Sounds good. I'm in Facebook, so we'll see if it pops up.
All right, perfect.
I don't know if it'll make you sign in, probably.
Okay, share on your timeline, share on your friend's timeline, share an event. Okay, share on a page you manage. There we go. All right, that's what I need. Oh no, what does that mean? 404 not found. All right, let's see. What if I'm already on there? Let's see what happens if I just put it on my timeline. It doesn't seem to like me sharing it as CWC. Oh, 404 not found. Bummer. Does this sound like what was happening to the last one you did, Doug?
It just never actually worked. And, you know, I wasn't running it on my end, and I don't understand these things, but she eventually gave up. So.
Oh no. Let's see.
Okay, let's see.
Welcome,
everyone. Oh, we've got one hand up. Carolyn, I clicked on to let your microphone on. Did you have a question? Oh. All right. I'm not sure what the raised hands mean, but if you have a question, please feel free to put it in the chat box. And we will be getting started here in just a minute. Okay, Tracy, how about now? Can you see?
Ooh.
Let me see. Nothing yet.
Nothing yet. All right. Let's see. Stop screen sharing. Start sharing your screen. Okay. To manage. Oh, here we go. Tallamy. All right. Go live. Let's try that. 2, 1. How about now?
Not yet. Let me reload
Looks like
it.
it's loading. Yeah. Hi, everyone. We're going to get started in just a minute. Welcome. Welcome, welcome. All right.
I see it.
All right, great.
We are live on Facebook. Perfect.
All right.
Ooh.
Welcome, everybody. We've got Sherman, New York, Erie. Someone's getting feedback, it looks like. Hopefully not me. All right. All right, it is 7 o'clock, so we are going to go ahead and get started. Oh, I guess I should figure out this here. All right. Hi. Welcome to A Guide to Restoring the Little Things That Run the World with Dr. Doug Tallamy. My name is Whitney Gleason, and I am the Water Quality Program Manager for the Chautauqua Watershed Conservancy. And I am joined tonight by my co-hosts, Carol Markham, who's our conservationist, and Tracy Carlson, who is our outreach assistant, as well, of course, as by the wonderful Dr. Doug Tallamy, our special guest. Tonight is brought to you by our chemical-free lawn care program, as well as our Lakescapes program, with support from the Chautauqua Lake and Watershed Management Alliance. At CWC, our mission is to preserve and enhance the water quality, scenic beauty, and ecologic health of the lakes, streams, wetlands, and watersheds of the Chautauqua region. And we aim to accomplish this by preserving and protecting land throughout the region, as well as through our educational outreach. Our chemical-free lawn care program is mainly an educational program that seeks to teach landowners the benefits of a chemical-free lawn for our community's overall health and well-being. Our Lakescapes program, which has been immensely popular thanks to our conservationist Carol, provides free technical assistance to individuals and businesses wanting to prevent nutrient and sediment loading to our lakes and waterways and to restore native plants to our region. So if you are interested in participating in either of these programs, we would love to have you. Please shoot us an email at info@chautauquawatershed.org or give us a call at 716-664-2166. Don't worry, I knew I breezed through those, but I will put all of that information in the chat box so you can find it there if you're interested. So now, what I'm sure you are all here for and waiting for, our fabulous guest this evening, Dr. Doug Tallamy, is an award-winning author and professor of entomology, and like so many others, we have been influenced by him, and his research has informed the very programs that I just mentioned to you all. And we are so, so grateful to have him here with us this evening. So he will be speaking. The name of the presentation is A Guide to Restoring the Little Things That Run the World. And please, please, if you have any questions, you do not need to wait till the very end. When it comes to you, feel free to submit it in the Q&A box, or if you're joining us via Facebook Live, you can go ahead and submit it there as well. And then once he's finished with his presentation, we will go through those and answer them, and hopefully we'll be able to get to all of them. So without further ado, please take it away, Doug.
Okay. Thank you. Is this working? Everybody can see this?
Yes.
Yep.
All right, great. Yeah, I call this Making Insects, a Guide to Restoring the Little Things That Run the World. And of course, that is not original. That comes from E.O. Wilson, Edward O. Wilson. I'm sure you know who he is, one of the most famous biologists of our time, certainly the most famous entomologist. He's Harvard emeritus at this point. He's 92 and he still writes a book every year, very long and illustrious career. Well, I've been lucky enough to meet, I just call him E.O. I've been lucky enough to meet E.O. twice. Once way back in 1982, I just got my job at the University of Delaware, and there was a conference on social insects in Boulder, Colorado. And of course, E.O. studies ants. He's a myrmecologist, so he was there. But it was a small conference, and the venue was very small. So when there were breaks, people just went outside, milled around. So there were talks, and then there was a break mid-morning. I went outside, and here's E.O. sitting on the curb, and nobody was sitting next to him. Well, believe it or not, I'm actually a shy guy, but that day I got the nerve up and I went over and I sat down next to the great E.O. Wilson. And he turned and he looked at me and he put out his hand. He said, "Hi, I'm Ed Wilson. I don't believe we met." And I shook his hand. I said, "Yeah, we haven't met. I'm Doug Tallamy and I'm nobody." Well, we talked for a while and it was great. And the break was over. More talks, then lunch, then more talks, and then the afternoon break. I went outside and here's E.O. sitting on the curb and nobody's sitting next to him. So now that we were buddies, I went over and I sat down next to E.O. Wilson and he turned and looked at me. He said, "Hi, I'm Ed Wilson. I don't believe we met." That was the first time I met him. Second time I met him was 32 years later. He was getting an award at the Academy of Natural Sciences in Philadelphia. It was the Ben Franklin Award. I also met Ben, but I was more excited to see my good buddy E.O. This award was to honor a lifetime achievement in science, but it really was focused on his efforts to save life on Earth, because he spent a lot of time doing that, writing about it. And one of the things he wrote a long time ago was this paper called The Little Things That Run the World. He was talking about the importance of conserving invertebrates, and most of those invertebrates are insects. And the point of this paper was very simple, that life as we know it depends on insects. And if they were to disappear, lots of nasty things would happen. First, most of the flowering plants would go extinct. And that would not only change the physical structure of terrestrial ecosystems, but it would change how energy flows through those systems. So much energy flows through flowering plants that the food webs that support our animals, our amphibians, our reptiles, our birds, our mammals, they would all collapse. And all of those things would disappear. The biosphere, the living portion of the earth, would rot because of the loss of insect decomposers that currently turn over nutrients very quickly. The only thing that would be left would be bacteria and fungi. And of course, humans would not survive any of those drastic changes. So it was a somber message, but it was largely ignored. Nobody really could imagine that insects might disappear. And besides, if we depend on insects, why do we have National Insect Killing Week? Now, this was 1929, but it was, we still have this embedded in our culture today. This was a campaign to boost the sales of all brands of chemicals. Didn't matter what it was, all brands of chemicals, to rid the community of insects. And it didn't matter what the insects were either. If it's an insect, it's bad, we have to kill it. Well, even if we succeed in killing all the insects in agriculture, because we understand there's an issue there, or if we kill them all at home where we simply don't like them, they don't hurt anything, but we don't like them, we don't worry about losing insects because we still think that they are common in our natural areas. Well, there are two reasons why that's no longer the case. And the first reason is we don't have enough natural areas right now. This is what the US looks like from the space shuttle at night. And that's because we've turned all those natural areas into the places that we live in and use. So we've turned them into cities. They're not designed to support insects. We've turned them into the suburbs. They're not designed to support insects. Either are our rural areas. They're not designed to support insects. Then we have agriculture. How about rangeland? 770 million acres of rangeland in the US. That's 22 times larger than the state of New York, dedicated to cattle, not designed to support insects. And typically it's overgrazed like this, where there's even less life. As a matter of fact, food production on planet Earth now claims about half of the Earth's land surface, and none of those areas are designed to support insects. Second reason that insects are not doing well in our natural areas is that the natural areas we have left aren't natural anymore. They have been invaded by plants from Asia. You're looking at a picture of a park near me called White Clay Creek State Park. I took this picture in March when plants from Asia leaf out before plants from North America. Then every bit of green that you see in this picture is an invasive species from Asia. And we know what these are. They're all escapees from our garden. It's multiflora rose and Oriental bittersweet and Japanese honeysuckle and bush honeysuckle and miscanthus and privet and Callery pear and barberry and burning bush. You name it, you know what they are. So about a third of the vegetation in our natural areas now are invasive plants, all of which are very poor at supporting insects. And we'll talk about why in a minute. So invasive plants destroy insect populations, and that becomes really important when it comes to supporting all the things that require insects. As a matter of fact, we have more than 3,300 species of introduced plants that many of which are now aggressively displacing native plant communities. You know, when I was young, sites like this were common on our windshields, or this is what lights look like at night, insects flying all around them. We don't see either of those today. It's anecdotal evidence, but there's good evidence that we are winning this war against insects, and we're winning it globally. And that's why we see headlines like this: the insect apocalypse is here. What does it mean for the rest of life on Earth? Well, EO told us what it means, but they're talking about global insect declines here. They've done a lot of data collection in Europe regarding insect declines, less here in the US, but we have been looking at pollinators, particularly native bees, because they're important. And about 50% of our Midwest native bees have already disappeared from their historic ranges within the last century. There are 4 species of bumblebees that have declined 96% in the last 20 years. 3 species, and some people argue about whether it's 2 or 3, but are already extinct. They're gone. You know, this decline 96%, that means they're not extinct yet officially, but they're functionally extinct. They're so few in number, there's not enough around to perform the roles that they normally perform in their ecosystem. And 25% of our bumblebee species are at risk of extinction. Some data from Europe: 30% of Europe's grasshoppers and katydids and crickets, their orthopterans, are facing extinction. Britain has lost 3/4 of its butterflies, or at least they're in steep decline. This V moth, for example, has declined 99%, and other moths are already extinct. Germany's lost 46 species of moths and butterflies altogether. 79% decline in flying insects in Germany since 1989. This is the scariest statistic of all, and that is that invertebrate abundance, and think insects again, has declined 45% globally since 1974. So almost half of the insects gone. Now remember, we need insects. Having them disappear is not a good thing. And of course, as insects decline, so do the birds that need them. We've got 432 species of North American birds that are now threatened with extinction. And it's not because there's only 5 individuals left of each one. It's because their populations are declining so precipitously that even if they're still common in some areas, that's the signal of impending extinction. Remember the passenger pigeon and the Carolina parakeet. They were once one of the most common birds in the world. This study came out last year, 2019, 3 billion fewer breeding birds today than there were 40 years ago. Let me remind you how many a billion is. 1,000,000 seconds is 12 days. 1 billion seconds is 31.7 years. This is a third of our North American bird population gone at this point. And the UN predicts that we actually will lose 1 million species to extinction, possibly in the next 20 years, and humans will suffer. This, by the way, is not an option. I mean, the report says, oh, like it doesn't matter. This is not an option. We cannot allow that to happen. Why does it matter? Well, remember, I'm talking about the insects, the creatures that keep us alive. They're disappearing. This should be the #1 thing on everybody's mind right now. But it's not. And that's because we are incredibly bad. Humans are incredibly bad at reacting to what we consider to be long-term risks. And we think in such short-term ways that something is going to happen next week. We don't even think about that. If it's not killing us right now, we don't tend to notice it. So let's look at this problem from the perspective of other animals. We're actually pretty good at feeling protective, feeling maternal or paternal towards other animals. So imagine you are this bird. You're a magnolia warbler. So you're a magnolia warbler. You have just finished overwintering in the Tallamy Mountains of Costa Rica, and it is time for you to fly north so that you can reproduce. That means you're going to migrate. And migrate, it turns out, is the most dangerous thing you're ever going to do. Predation risks are high while you're migrating, but the physiological strain on these little birds is amazing. They lose 35% of their body weight just when they're flying across the Gulf of Mexico. And of course, when they hit the land on the other side, they've got to put that weight back. Most birds fly way up to New York or Canada to reproduce. And every time they're flying, they can go up to 300 miles in a single night. They're losing 35 to 50% of their body weight. So they have to stop on the way and replace that. They stop at what we call stopover sites. And what they're doing is replacing it with insects. Remember, in the spring, the fruit, the berries aren't out yet. They need protein. So migration is tough. It is hard on birds. And you might ask the question, why did it evolve? That's a good question. If it's so hard on birds, why did it evolve? And the answer is that migration evolved for the same reason that anything evolved. The benefits of migrating were greater than the costs. The costs were large, but the benefits were even greater. So what are the benefits of migrating? Migrants have more food. You know, in the temperate zone, in the spring, all the leaves come out. We have this giant flush of new leaves across the continent, and following that giant flush of new leaves is the giant flush of the insects that eat those leaves, primarily caterpillars. And that is what the birds are coming north to use for reproduction. That big bonanza, that flush of food, does not happen in the tropics. The tropics are very, very steady. The food that is produced, the populations have increased to the point where they use all of it all the time. Intense competition. And again, very constant. So the spring bonanza of food in the north gave birds an opportunity to actually make more babies. If they flew north, they could produce 3 to 6 offspring per year, as opposed to 2 to 4 if they stayed in the tropics. So that doesn't sound like much, but it's enough to offset the disadvantages of all those costs of migration. So just to sum up here, bird migration was only adaptive because there were so many insects seasonally available in the temperate zone. They flew north to take advantage of that. How many insects do birds need? How important are they? Somebody measured back in 2018 that birds eat 500 million tons of insects each year. I have no idea how they measured that, but that was the estimate, 500 million tons. And they presented this as if the birds are doing us a great favor because all insects are bad. So birds are great at pest control. Let's rewrite that and say birds require 500 million tons of insects each year just to maintain their populations. And if we decrease this tonnage of insects, we're gonna decrease the number of birds that are out there. So when migration evolved, there were plenty of insects in the temperate zone. Is that still the case? Are there still enough insects in the temperate zone to justify the cost of migration? And the answer is every time we measure it, no, there's not. There's not. Let's just focus on the impact of these introduced plants we talked about, whether they are ornamentals that don't move or whether they are ornamentals that escape and become invasive species. What do they do to insect populations? Well, we've done a number of studies over the years looking at this, and one of them was this one. It was a very simple study. I got an undergraduate, and we went out into hedgerows in Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Delaware that were invaded by non-native plants, things like autumn olive and multiflora rose and porcelain berry and on. And we measured caterpillar populations in standardized ways in these invaded hedgerows and compared it to caterpillar populations in uninvaded hedgerows. The real trick was finding uninvaded hedgerows because there's not many of those left. But we did find some, and what we found is there was a 68% reduction in the number of species in the invaded hedgerows, a 91% reduction in the abundance of the caterpillars in those hedgerows, and a 96% reduction in the biomass, the actual weight of the caterpillars in those hedgerows. So this is a measure of the amount of energy that is available, the amount of food that is available for birds in these hedgerows. We went back to the, it's blocked here. We went back to the data that were used by Rosenberg et al. In last year's paper saying there were 3 billion fewer birds in North America. They have their data online, and we looked at which birds were actually declining. They're not declining equally. The birds that require insects in at least one part of their life history, primarily for reproduction, declined about 10 million individuals per species, whereas the birds that did not require insects, there are a few birds that can actually reproduce without insects, like the finches and the doves, they actually gained some numbers. So all birds are not declining equally. It's the birds that depend on insects that are declining. I think there's a connection there. And this doesn't affect just a few obscure birds. We're talking about 386 species of neotropical migrants may no longer have enough food to justify their migration. And then we've got all those birds that don't migrate, but still breed in the temperate zone. They have to have enough insects to breed as well. And when we take away 96% of their food, they don't. We're talking about our swallows and our swifts as migrants, our orioles, our hummingbirds, our vireos and tanagers and buntings and flycatchers, our thrushes, our warblers, all those species of warblers. And again, all those resident birds. How many insects does it take to rear a clutch of birds? Well, here's data from chickadees, 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars to rear one clutch of a bird that weighs 1/3 of an ounce. And remember, chickadees and most birds forage very close to the nest, about 50 meters from the nest. So if you want these birds to breed in your yard, you've got to have 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars in your yard, or they're not going to be able to do it. They're not flying 5 miles down the road to get their food. That takes more energy than you get from the caterpillars. And of course, that's not how we've designed our landscapes. We haven't designed them to produce caterpillars. Work by my former graduate student, Desiree Naranjo, looked at chickadee reproduction in the suburbs of Washington, D.C. So this is inside the Beltway of Washington, D.C. Looked at Carolina chickadee. She had a number of nesting pairs that she looked at over 3 years. And this is what a typical foraging territory of a nesting pair looked like. This is where the nest was. She would put up a nest box, and this line represents the foraging territory. 90% of the foraging occurred within that red line. And these blue areas are the plants on which they did 90% of their foraging. So let's look at what they are. Well, they're all the native trees in this landscape. So this is suburbia right now, but there are some native trees, and that's where the chickadees were foraging. She also looked at the trees that were not native in this area, the Japanese maples, the silk trees, all the trees from Asia, ginkgo, black poplar, crepe myrtle, saucer magnolia. And the birds weren't foraging on those at all. And of course, it's easy to picture a landscape where you've got these non-native plants dominating it. So the big thing she did was compare population growth or lack of growth in landscapes that were dominated by native plants versus landscapes that were dominated by introduced plants. None of the landscapes that were dominated by native plants were 100% native. Some of the landscapes dominated by introduced plants were 100% introduced plants. But when she looked at what was happening in those landscapes dominated by introduced plants, she found they produced 75% fewer caterpillars. So right away, the amount of bird food was reduced by 75%. They were 60% less likely to have breeding chickadees at all. Now remember, she put up a nest box and the birds would come and look around, and they were smart enough to look at the plants in that landscape and say, there's not enough food here. We're not even going to try to breed in this landscape. If they did try, their nests contained 1.5 fewer eggs. Those nests were 29% less likely to survive at all. They produced 1.2 fewer fledglings on average and delayed maturation by 1.5 days. And you might say, well, that's not tremendous differences there. But when you put all that together in a population growth model, this is what you get. As a function of the percentage of non-native plant biomass in your landscape, from no non-native plants up to 100%. This dotted line is replacement rate. This is the rate at which the population has to make babies in order to replace the adults that die every year. If they reproduce at this level, the population is stable. It's not growing, but it's not shrinking either. So we call it sustainable. If you reproduce more babies than replacement rate, you have a growing population. And if you have fewer babies, you've got a shrinking population. Right here is where they overlap. Around 30% non-native plants. And what this says is if you have 70% of your landscape plants, native, productive native plants, 70% of the biomass, you can have a stable, sustainable population of chickadees. But if you have more than 30% non-native plants, then you get into this negative, and that's unsustainable. You are losing more birds than you're making every year, and that won't last for very long. But this is actually good news for two reasons. This is the first time this relationship has been measured for any bird anywhere. So if anybody's doubting that their choice of plants in their landscape actually impact the things around them, go to this study. It should convince you. But what I find really good news is that this suggests there's an area of compromise. You can have up to 30% of the plant biomass in your yard non-native. You can have your ginkgo, you can have your crepe myrtle, all those accent plants, your lilac. So anything as long as it's not invasive. And as long as it doesn't exceed 30% of the plant biomass and still have a sustainable breeding bird population. And that's good news to me, because if my message was you can't have any non-native plants in your landscape, I'd have very few people listening to me. She also looked at the migrating birds that stopped by her properties. And it was 51 species of migrants that stopped to refuel on their way north. Because that's why everybody says they're resting. What they're really doing is gassing up. They've lost all that energy. They've got to stop to eat insects. And if they come down in the land of ginkgo, which makes 0 caterpillars, they're out of luck. That's the end of their migration. So a lot of people say, well, I don't have a property big enough to support a breeding bird. And that might be the case. But if you have a property big enough to support a single tree and you make it the right tree, that's making lots of caterpillars, you can support migrating birds, and they will stop, they will appreciate it. What if I said to you, introduced plants are reducing your bank account by 96%? I bet that would get your attention. We understand that money is the currency we live off. We need it. Well, insects are the currency in our ecological bank account. And remember, it's our ecological bank account that is keeping us alive. We cannot afford to be designing landscapes that have 96% fewer insects. It's just not going to last very long. So we have two choices. We can create landscapes in which nature thrives, or we can create landscapes that are ecologically dead. For the last 100 years, we've been doing this. We got to start to move over to this. The first option is going to sustain us. The second one will not. And that's the message that I've been trying to get across. And people are actually starting to listen. So my argument is that our only viable option is to find a way to live sustainably with the natural world that sustains us. I can't see any other option. Living unsustainably, I mean, think about what that word means. How are we going to do this? Well, one thing we need to do is look at the property that is privately owned. And that's because 85.6% of the land east of the Mississippi is privately owned. If we ignored private properties and only did conservation in parks and preserves, we're just destined to fail, because that's only about 85 or 15% of the land mass. And even if our conservation was perfect in those areas, it wouldn't be big enough. Those parks and preserves would be too small and too isolated from each other to sustain the populations that run the ecosystem that sustain humans. So we're talking about converting landscapes like this into functional ecosystems. We have to be able to produce insects, make insects in a landscape like this. Let's start with home landscapes. First, we have to understand what the causes of insect declines are. There are a number of causes. Insect declines have been described as death by 1,000 cuts, but the misuse and overuse of pesticides is a major cause. Habitat loss, that's habitat loss right there. The use of these non-native ornamental plants. If all these plants were native, we'd need more of them, but still they'd be able to sustain some insects. They're not, they're all non-native plants, so they're not sustaining any insects. And then of course, these non-native ornamentals escape and become our invasive species. Security lights are turning out to be just night pollution. Light pollution at night is turning out to be a major cause of insect declines. And of course, we've got climate change, which is thrown in there. There's good news here though, and that is these, 5 causes of insect declines are relatively easy to reverse. Climate change is a little tougher. We're going to address climate change in the voting booth, but these, a single individual can change habits and make effective inroads in insect loss. And we'll talk about how we do that. What we need to do is raise the bar about what we're asking our landscapes to do. This is a house down the street from me, and he's got a beautiful lawn, you got to admit, but it is a deadscape and the earth isn't big enough to permit this anymore. When we've chosen plants in the past, we've chosen them for their decorative value only. We've seen plants only as decorations. So when we go to the nursery, it's pretty, it's okay, maybe a screen or anchor or focal point, but it's all been about aesthetics with no thought to the ecological role that the plants in our home landscapes have to start playing. And when we think of plants just as decoration, then landscaping equals ecological destruction. This is pretty, nice design, but it is not a functional ecosystem. But we could pick plants that are pretty, but also produce what we call ecosystem services. They support the food webs, they protect the watersheds, they store carbon, restore our soil, create pollinator habitats, support natural enemies to keep things in balance, on and on. These are all things that keep humans happy and healthy. We could do both. And when we choose plants based on, or at least one of the criteria is function, what they're actually doing, then landscaping equals ecosystem restoration. And I'm going to call this 21st century landscaping. We've tried 20th century landscaping and we're now in the 6th grade extinction. It's not working real well. So we need to put the plants back, and we need to put the right plants back so that we can make insect populations. There's no way we're going to restore ecosystems without restoring insect populations. We're finally getting back to insects here. Okay, what does it take to make insects? It takes energy. Same thing it takes to make any living thing, and that energy comes from the sun. It's sunlight. If you're looking for a miracle on planet Earth, look to photosynthesis, because it's plants, it's photosynthesis that allows us to eat sunlight. And without plants, we're going to have to eat sunlight some other way. Good luck in that. And photosynthesis does other great things for us. It pulls carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, come back here, and combines it with water in the ground, produces oxygen that we all still need. And now the energy from the sun is tied up in the carbon bonds of simple sugars and carbohydrates, which is the food that runs the food webs that keeps everything alive, except for some minor food webs at the bottom of the ocean. It's sulfur vents, and we're not going to depend on them. So very simply, plants are making all the food. So to make insects, first we need plants. But which insects should we make? There are a lot of insects out there. Estimates are 3 to 4 million species worldwide. And the reason I say estimates is we still haven't identified most of them. We've identified just over 1 million of those species. About 164,000 described species in the US. There are a lot of still undescribed species in the US, but we're not going to have all those in our yard. So we have to choose the ones that have the biggest ecological impact. And I'm going to argue that there are 2 groups that have the biggest impact. One is the insects that maintain plant diversity. We need all those plants. They are the first level in our food webs. And we need the insects that then take the energy that plants fix and move it out to food webs. Those are the two most important groups of insects. And those, of course, are our pollinators. But the ones that don't get a lot of attention are caterpillars. So who says these are the two most important groups of insects? I do, and I'm giving this talk, so I get to say that. Somebody somewhere is going to argue, but those are good reasons. So let's start with pollinators. Why do we need pollinators? Well, you've all heard we need pollinators because they pollinate 1/3 of our crops. That's actually not true. It's about 1/7 of our crops. But that is a very anthropocentric view of why we need pollinators. We need pollinators because of what they do to all the plants, not just our crops. They're pollinating 80% of all plants and 90% of all flowering plants, pollinated by animals, mostly by insects. If we lost our pollinators, we would lose 80 to 90% of the plants on the planet. It simply is not an option. So we're not talking about good land stewardship here to maintain pollinators. We're talking about essential land stewardship. And I wish we started to view it that way. It is not an option to not do this. All right, to do it, we have to understand what a pollinator is. Most people think that any insect that goes to a plant is a pollinator, whereas that's not true. Most of the insects that go to plants are not pollinating that plant. They are visiting the plant to take the nectar or to eat the pollen, but they don't transfer it efficiently from the male part of the flower to the female part of the flower. So we'll just call those flower visitors. They're part of the diversity that's out there. That's all good, but they're not actually pollinating. Who are our major pollinators? Well, we have one species of honeybee introduced from Europe, and it's very good at pollinating a lot of our crops. We have 4,000 species of native bees, which are largely ignored, unfortunately, because they did all the pollination in North America that bees do before we brought over the honeybee. And we got about 14,000 species of moths and butterflies, many of which are not, they're not designed to be great pollinators, but there's so many of them. And they do most of their pollination at night when we're not watching, that they actually are a significant force in pollination. So let's talk about this 4,000 species of native bees first. Let's understand what a bee is. When I tell people, I want you to create habitat for native bees, and I want you to do it in your yard, they say, nope, I'm not going to do that because I don't want to be stung. And I say, no, don't worry. Native bees don't sting you. Most of them are solitary bees. They're not protecting a hive. You can pet them when they're on a flower and they won't sting. So there's no worries there. And they say, that is not true. I was stung last week. And what they were really stung by last week is this guy, a yellow jacket. It's a wasp. It is not a bee at all. And wasp and honeybees do 99.999% of all the stinging out there. So when you're stung, it is almost certainly not by a native bee. So no worries. You can have native bees safely. How do we make native bees? Well, you have to provide what they need. They need a place to live and they need something to eat. That's not unusual. So where do they live? Primarily, they're ground nesters, or they live inside of stems, either woody stems or pithy stems. That would account for most of the bees that are out there. 70% of them do nest in the ground, and they make little holes like this. This is a Calides bee. You see it early in the spring. They dig a single tunnel straight down, and then little side shoots. And in those side shoots, they pack it full of pollen and lay an egg, and then they close it up, and that's the extent of their maternal care. They're very shy. As soon as a shadow hits them, they dive back down into their hole. So not aggressive at all. So in order to have these guys, you need to have little patches of bare ground. Most people who own property do have ground, so this should be an option. If you have slight south facing slope, they seem to prefer that. And of course, the soil needs to be diggable, but bees are good. They can dig even in soil with very high clay content. But a sandy loam is what they really love. They go crazy there. Pithy and woody stem nesters do this. They hollow out the center of those stems, and they make cells that are progressively older. This one is the oldest one. They pack it full of pollen, and then they lay an egg on it, and the egg hatches. That's what a bee larva looks like. This is a picture from Heather Home, by the way. So this one's not quite as old, so it's got more pollen, hasn't eaten it. This one's even younger, and they go right down the line there. So when this guy matures, it will form a pupa right in the cell, eat all the pollen, and then tunnel out through the side. And that's why you see little holes in stems. So where are they nesting? They're nesting in things like old goldenrod stems, in all of those, what we call dead field material. And you got to mow it down because it's ugly. Well, when you mow it down, you just got rid of your pithy stem nesters. And what Heather has actually found is that they're spending the winter in so this summer, these plants are growing, they're green now, but they will die back and look like this winter. And then next summer, bees will nest in these plants that were produced this summer. It's not the same. There's a year delay there. So anytime you mow these guys down, whether it's the fall or the spring, you are wiping out what the bees need that following year. So Heather says if we leave maybe 1.5 or 2 feet, we can cut off the tops here. They do most of their nesting down close to the ground. So that's good to know. It gives us an aesthetic tool to work with. This is elderberry, soft wood, and this is after the bees have already emerged, but they like soft wood like elderberry. But what do we do when a branch dies on our elderberry? We cut it out, because that's good land stewardship. We thought we got to get rid of anything that's messy. Well, because most people don't have any what we call coarse woody debris in their landscape, somebody invented bee hotels, and they work. You drill holes into wood, and then the woody stem nesters will go in there, and they'll pack it full of pollen, then seal it off, and they come in all different sizes and shapes. And some people really get enthusiastic about them. As a matter of fact, I think humans have more fun making bee hotels than the bees do. But there's a problem. There has been research that shows when you make big bee hotels, you're essentially putting all your bees in one basket. And if a predator or a disease finds that basket, it can wipe them all out. So it is far better to make small, they're less fun, but small bee hotels, and scatter them all over your property. Put them in a place where they're not going to get rained on. And then they can be very effective in giving bees a nesting site. Okay, what do bees need to reproduce? They need pollen, and they need nectar, and they need it all season long. Here's data from, this is from Jared Fowler. Here's the distribution of native bees in New England. Starting in March all the way through November, there are species out there. So they need pollen and nectar all that time. And this is the biggest challenge in maintaining bee populations at home, is having something that's in bloom all the time. Typically, most landscapes are too small to do this effectively. But if you think about the foraging range of a typical bee, it's neighborhood size. And if you divide, get together with your neighbor, it'll give you good reasons to actually talk to your neighbors and decide who's going to have which plants that are in bloom in which sunny spots, so that the entire neighborhood always has something in bloom. Then you can effectively support native bee populations. But which plants should you use? This is the other challenge. Sam Droege, who is Mr. Native Bee, knows more about native bees than anybody, says we need to plant plants that meet the needs of our specialist bees. The generalist bees will be able to use those plants as well. So things like bumblebees and honeybees are generalist bees. They can use the pollen and nectar from lots of different plants. But there are a lot of bees that can only use the pollen from particular plant genera. And if you don't have those genera, you don't have those bees. Why do we have specialist bees? And by the way, we've got a lot of specialist bees. There are over 900 bees just in the California area. 900 species of native bees that are highly specialized. So well over 1,000 specialist bees in this country overall. But they specialize because flowers are really different from each other. They differ in when they bloom, what they look like and what they smell like. The pollen morphology is species specific. You can identify which species you're talking about just by the nooks and crannies on a pollen grain, which, by the way, are designed to grab onto the hairs of particular species of bees. That's the specialization that we're talking about. And of course, they have vastly different nutritional value. And bees adapt to this, and flowers love that, because they want bees that are going to move their pollen from the male end of the flower to the female end, and they don't want bees that are going to take it away and eat it without moving it. So they focus, they have this very tight mutualism between the flower and the specialist bee. Here are some really good flowers for supporting specialist bees in the New York area. Sunflowers lead the way, 13 species of bees. Various asters, 12 more species of bees. Goldenrods, 11 more species. Willows, 9 more species. If you add all this up, what is it? It's 40 some. About 45 species of bees that would not be in your landscape unless you have sunflowers, asters, goldenrods, and native willows. And then you can go right on down the line. There are lots of plants that only have 1 or 2 bee specialists. That's why plant diversity is really good. But having a lawn with white clover in it that's better than nothing, but it's only going to address the generalist bees like bumblebees and honeybees. And all these guys, these specialist bees, will be out in the cold. Okay, that's all we're going to say about bees. Let's talk about caterpillars. And we need to talk about caterpillars because they're transferring more energy from plants to any other to other animals than any other type of plant eater. And that includes elephants. If you took caterpillars out of the system, most of the energy would remain in plants. And that's because most animals don't eat plants directly. They eat an insect that ate the plant, and most of those insects are caterpillars. So there's a lot of special things about caterpillars. Let's look at what is neat for caterpillars in terms of birds, because they're really eating a lot of caterpillars. And there's a number of things. Caterpillars are soft. So if you think of this guy as if it's a sausage with a very thin wrapper, it's full of good food, a lot of protein, a lot of fat, and the thin wrapper is exoskeleton, which is undigestible, so you don't want a lot of it. You want just a little bit. So caterpillars have a low percentage of this chitin compared to things like beetles, which are not like little sausages, they're like little tanks. A lot of chitin, undigestible, and they've got a lot of sharp edges. But these soft caterpillars, because they're soft, you can stuff them down the throat of your offspring without fear of injuring them. Have you ever watched a parent bird rear its young? They're pretty rough. It's like a plunger. They just stuff it down there. They're also relatively large prey items. One medium-sized caterpillar is equal to the biomass of 200 aphids. And some of our birds do chase aphids around, but do you want to chase 200 aphids or eat 1 caterpillar? They're very nutritious, as I said, and it turns out they're the best source of carotenoids. These are compounds only made by plants that vertebrates can't make, so they absolutely need to get them. So all those things make caterpillars special. How do we increase the number of caterpillars in our yards? Well, we add caterpillars to our yards, to our landscapes, by adding the plants that make them. And this is the tricky part, because all plants don't make a lot of insects or a lot of caterpillars in general. As a matter of fact, most plants don't make a lot, which means we have to be very careful about the plants we choose for our landscapes. Most plants don't make a lot of caterpillars because they don't want to be eaten. They protect themselves from caterpillars, from other things that eat plants, by loading their tissues with nasty tasting chemicals, secondary metabolic compounds that make those tissues either bitter or downright toxic. And it's a really effective defense that keeps most of the insects of the world from eating most of the plants of the world. And that's why it's green out there. It's not because there are no insects out there that want to eat those plants. It's because most of the insects that are out there cannot eat most of the plants. They are too well protected. And if you don't believe me, after this talk, go out and eat a plant. See if you like it. You're not going to like it. It's a really effective defense. There's a reason that our kids don't like vegetables, because they inherently know that they're toxic. This is the trouble with webinars. You can't tell when I'm joking, but... All right, we do know that insects eat plants. So how do they do that? If plants are protecting themselves chemically, how do they actually, insects eat them? This is where the specialization comes in. 90% of the insects that eat plants are what we call host plant specialists. They have developed a very close relationship with 1 or 2 plant lineages. And that close relationship allows them to come up with adaptations that circumvent the chemical devices that protect those particular plants. So they evolve enzymes that store and excrete and detoxify those chemical defenses, behavioral adaptations and life history adaptations that minimize the exposure of those insects to those nasty chemicals. But it takes a long period of evolutionary history, long period of exposure to those plant lineages for all those adaptations to fall into place. It does not happen overnight. And this is why our plants from Asia don't support insects. They haven't been here long enough. This is why burning bush, this is why bush honeysuckle, all those invasive species aren't supporting any insects, because they have chemicals in their leaves that our insects have not adapted to. And it takes a long time, and I'm talking about thousands of years, for the insects actually to be able to switch over to a new host like this. So crepe myrtle, for example, favorite ornamental, but supports no caterpillars. English ivy, nothing, and on we go. So point is that plant choice matters. And the plants you choose for your landscape are going to determine what can live there. So at my house, I wanted to have the Pandora Sphinx come. Our yard was mowed for hay. There wasn't anything there when we moved in. So the plants I put back, I targeted because I wanted to bring particular moths. I like moths. I take pictures of them. Wanted them to come to my yard. And this is one of the first ones I targeted. Pandora Sphinx, beautiful, but it eats Virginia creeper. So I had to plant Virginia creeper. I wanted the tulip tree silk moth. So I needed tulip trees. They actually came in and had no trouble getting them. Luna moth, who doesn't want the Luna moth? We needed sweet gum. We planted that. I wanted the zebra swallowtail. It's a specialist on pawpaw. Planted pawpaw, but it took 9 years for these guys to find it, but they finally did. Finally, 26 miles they came from the nearest population to colonize our pawpaws. And in the meantime, we got a lot of pawpaws. Grapes, very powerful plant. You get things like the 8-spotted forester moth. And these are just examples of the insects that eat these different plants. So we planted native grapes, planted viburnums to get the green marvel. Goldenrod came in on its own, but it gave us beautiful insects like the brown-hooded owlet. Poison ivy also came in on its own, but we get insects. We get the beautiful utilia. Who would not want the beautiful utilia? You know, everybody worries about poison ivy, but you know when you get poison ivy? When you try to pull it out, just ignore it. You can run faster than it can. It will not get you. And it makes really valuable berries for the birds. Persimmon gives us the sculptured moth. The black gum gives us the Hebrew. Our beleaguered ashes give us a number of sphinx moths, things like the beautiful fawn sphinx. Maples, very powerful plants, give us the rosy maple moth. Walnuts and hickory give us the royal walnut moth. This is my favorite large moth, extremely beautiful. It's actually extirpated from New England at this point, so we need to work hard to save this guy. Elms give us double-tooth prominent, witch hazel, the witch hazel dagger moth, pines imperial moth. Even our native clematis gives us specialized moth, like the spotted thyrus. Ironwood gives us two-toned anthillis. Buttonbush, the lost owlet, native willows, the herald. Coral honeysuckle gives us a snowberry clearwing. Evening primrose moth is on evening primrose, believe it or not. Showy sumac, or showy emerald, is on sumac. And I'm not talking about poison sumac. I've never seen poison sumac. That's a plant of the swamp. I'm talking about the smooth sumac or staghorn sumacs. They're wonderful plants to stabilize soil. You do not need a plant from Asia to stabilize your soil. Our natives will do fine. Then we've got a couple plants that are real powerhouses. Things like black cherry will give us the white furcula and the crocus geometer, the Io moth, the beautiful cecropia moth, the colorful zally, the tufted bird dropping moth. And again, I ask you, who would not want the tufted bird dropping moth at home? Just so you have fun saying its name. The paddle caterpillar. Ask your kids to go out and look for the paddle caterpillar, and then get them to figure out what those paddles are for. They're not decorations. They have a function. It's the same function that the filament geometer has, these 4 filaments sticking out from its back from. Get them to think about it. I want you to think about it. And I'm not going to tell you what the function is. I want you to think about it. These are all on black cherry. Small-eyed sphinx, the Harris's 3-spot that makes an umbrella out of shed head capsules, holds it over its head, and actually uses it as a weapon. If something comes along, it swings back and forth and whacks them with it. Then oaks, the most powerful plants that we can put into our landscape, give us things like the hag moth that thinks it's a tarantula, the red wash prominent, the white dotted prominent, the spiny oak moth, the skiff moth, the white blotch heterocantha, the oak skeletonizer, the solitary oak leaf miner, crown bugulatrix, the half oval ancillus, pink striped oak worm. This is my favorite by far, the spun glass slug caterpillar. They're called slug caterpillars because the head is tucked up underneath, and they're really not slugs. Plus literally hundreds more species are supported on the oaks at my house. Oaks are what we call keystone plants. They're one of a small group of native plants that are doing most of the work. About 5% of our native plants are making 75% of the food that drives food webs. And this is across the country. Doesn't matter where you go, this pattern holds. or 14% of our native plants are making 90% of the caterpillar food that drives the food webs, which means most of our native plants aren't making all that much food. So we've got to focus on those keystone plants. So oaks produce, there's a little thing in front of me here, looks like 500 and something caterpillar species in upper New York. That's how many species? That's 500 and let's say it's 13, I don't know. Bird food species, right where you live. Where did I take all those pictures I just showed you? I took them in my yard, and this is what my yard looked like when we moved in. Again, it had been mowed for hay. It was bare. This is what it looked like just a few years ago from the same perspective. Got a little lawn there. We're very traditional, but we put the plants back, and I targeted plants that supported a lot of moths, a lot of keystone species, and I'm taking pictures of every moth species that I have found at our house, and I'm up to 998 species of moths, 998 species of bird food, and we haven't gotten to the butterflies yet. And because we have that much bird food there, I'm getting ahead of myself. We have much bird food there because we planted all of these things, witch hazel and many oaks and persimmons, and all of these plant lineages each brought particular species of moths to our yard. We also tolerated these things. A lot of people call these weeds. They pull out Virginia creeper, they pull out their goldenrod and their sumac, certainly pull out their poison ivy and their greenbrier, their dodder, black cherries. Oh, a weed tree, I hear that all the time. This is the second most powerful tree you can put in your landscape. And when you get rid of these, you're getting rid of the life that they support. And because we added all those caterpillars to our yard, we also added the birds that eat them. Wood thrush, for example, came to our yard, not this year, but last year, because we got Virginia creeper making the lettered sphinx. We have indigo bunnies because we have alders making ruby quakers. We've got chipping sparrows because we have black walnuts making gray edge bomolokas. Field sparrows because we have oaks making red line panapodas. We've got titmice because we've got black cherries making dowdy pinions. All these pictures taken in my yard. Phoebes because we have native grasses making skippers. Phoebes nested on the light above our front door this year. Robins because we have weeds making things like the white line sphinx and many other types of moths. Those weeds, of course, are native plants, very productive. We've got our Carolina chickadees because we've got tulip trees making tulip tree beauties, white-eyed vireas because we have spice bush making spice bush swallowtails, house wrens because we have hickories making copper underwings, bluebirds because we have sycamores making drab prominence. As a matter of fact, 55 species of breeding birds at our house. Point is, by choosing the right plants and using more of them in our landscapes, we could make insects nearly everywhere. So I'm going to leave you with 9 things that you can do to restore the ecosystem function in your yard. We'll talk briefly about each one of those. The first one is cutting your lawn in half. We have way too much lawn in this country. An area the size of New England has now been converted to lawn, over 40 million acres. And this, of course, is a deadscape. And you know what it does to watersheds. Well, it does the same thing to food webs, ends them right there. So we need to, I suggest we cut the area of lawn in half. And if we cut the area of lawn in half, we can build a new national park. It'll be 20 million acres in size. We can call it Homegrown National Park. I drive by this churchyard in Mississippi. There's a festival down there every year that I go to, and everybody, of course, is inside worshiping God's creation, and on the outside, they're killing them all because we're not thinking. Plant for specialist bees. We talked about that. You got to put in the plants that are going to support those specialist bees, or you won't have them. Remove invasive species from your property. We didn't talk about that, but you should survey the plants that are on your property. It's very easy to find out what the important invasives are, but most of them are escapees from our gardens. So replace them with plants that are either native or non-natives that are not going to move from your property. Use those keystone plants. How do you know what a keystone plant is? You go to Native Plant Finder and the National Wildlife Federation website, and you put in your zip code, and the ranked list of the best plants that support caterpillar populations will pop up for your county. So in northern New York, this is what it looks like. These are just the top 6, but it goes right down the line there. Both woody plants and herbaceous plants. Now notice I say native oaks, native cherries, native willows. You can go to the nursery and you can buy an English oak, or you can buy a Chinese oak. I don't know why you do that, because we have over 90 species of oaks in North America, and they do just fine. Same thing, you can go buy your flowering cherries from Asia, or weeping willow from the Middle East. The most common birch planted in North America is European birch, white birch. When you do that, you cut down insect use of these plants by 68%. So stick to the natives. Stick to the natives. You can hardly tell the difference. These are our top herbaceous plants. Solidago produces 110 caterpillar species. Aster is very high. Sunflower is very high. And remember, these were the top 3 in terms of specialized bees too. So you're making food webs and supporting those bees at the same time with those plants. Landscape for caterpillars. What do I mean by that? Once you put your trees in the landscape, you have to allow the caterpillars to complete their life history, to make it through to adulthood, or it's not going to work. I live in Chester County, Pennsylvania, southeast Pennsylvania. And in Chester County, Pennsylvania, there are 511 species of caterpillars that develop on oaks. A few of those, like the Polyphemus moth, complete their development on the tree. So the caterpillar eats the leaves, it spins a cocoon, hangs from the branch, then the moth emerges, and it does it all over again. And I wish everything did that, but they don't. 94% of them, 480 species that use the oaks in my county, drop from the tree and complete their development underground. They wiggle down in the ground when it's nice and soft and pupate underground, or they spin a cocoon in the leaf litter that is under the tree. And you see where I'm going here. We don't have any leaf litter under our trees, and we have hard, compact, mowed soil, which is very tough for a caterpillar to tunnel down in to survive in without getting stepped on or mowed. So this becomes an ecological trap. You are calling in the adults to lay their eggs, the caterpillars develop and drop down and die. And it's another major reason we have insect declines around the world. And of course, the cement landscape is even less viable landscape for caterpillars. And I'm not trying to discourage the use of trees in cities, just the opposite, but I am trying to minimize the use of cement as a landscape option. This is just laziness. And talk about watershed management. You couldn't do worse by cementing everything over. This is what most people do. They plant a tree and then they have lawn around it mowed, and nobody's measured the survivorship of caterpillars in a situation like this. But I guarantee it's higher in a situation like this, where you have a tree, a layered landscape. Here's a native azalea. You could have a dogwood over this, then ferns and ground cover. This is a safe site for those caterpillars. They can drop down, they can pupate. They're not going to get squished. They're not going to get mowed. This is where you can do your fancy spring ephemeral gardening. And again, safe site for those caterpillars. Put in your ground covers, things like wild ginger or mayapple or ferns, or any number of ground covers that do well in shaded situations. Again, perfect places for the moths to complete their development. Reduce your light pollution. Light pollution it's turning out is a major cause of insect declines. And I know what you're going to say. You got to have your lights on at night, or the bad man will come. Okay, you've got options. First of all, this is how it kills insects, by exhaustion. They fly around until they're exhausted. They collide with the light and get incinerated. They die of dehydration. The bats and things come pick them off. Exposure to bright lights at night blinds a lot of insects, and it wrecks their daily activities where they lay eggs and everything else. So what do? Put a motion sensor on that security light. If you're worried the bad man's going to come, put a motion sensor on it so that it only turns on when the bad man comes. And the first thing you're gonna recognize is that the bad man doesn't come very often. If you don't want to do that, put a yellow bulb in your security light so that it sheds yellow wavelengths. Yellow wavelengths are far less attractive to insects, and yellow LED lights are the least attractive. Now, this is something everybody can do overnight. If we replaced all of our light pollution overnight, we would save billions of insects each season. Very powerful and very easy. Oppose mosquito spraying. This is Mosquito Joe. And he's undoing everything I'm trying to do. He goes around and he sprays, quote, mosquitoes, but he's killing everything that is on in our yards that we've just brought to our yards. And that includes when your neighbor does it, it's killing the one in your yard as well. These are pyrethroids. And he says, well, that's a natural component, so it's okay. It's organic. It's true. Pyrethroids come from plants, but so does cyanide. It doesn't make it okay. He also says it only kills mosquitoes. Not so. Kills all the insects it comes in contact with. You can control mosquitoes, but you do it in the larval stage. When Mosquito Joe sprays your house, he's killing 10% of the adult mosquitoes. In order to get control, he's got to kill 90%. So he's not even close to controlling your mosquitoes, which is why he's got to come back and back and back and keep charging you. But mosquito dunks work. You get a bucket, you fill it with water, you put in hay or straw and let it sit for a couple days, and it ferments, and it's the perfect medium that attracts ovipositing mosquitoes. This is where they want to lay their eggs. Once they lay their eggs, you let the eggs hatch, then you put in a mosquito dunk. A mosquito dunk, as you get this at the hardware store, it's Bacillus thuringiensis. It's a mosquito disease, and it's targeted. The little guys go up and they nibble on this and they die, and it only kills mosquitoes, doesn't kill anything else. If everybody had buckets of mosquito dunks, or if you put these things in standing water where you think mosquitoes are coming out of, you will have good mosquito control. As a matter of fact, minimize insecticide use overall. Homeowners use more pesticides per acre than are used in agriculture. And except for termite control, almost all of it is absolutely unnecessary. It's there because of entomophobia. We just don't like insects. That's not a good reason to wreck the planet. So control yourself, don't spray. And join your homeowners association and change from within. A lot of people tell me that they cannot do what I'm suggesting because they've got very strict rules where they live. They have to have this certain types of plants. They're almost always non-native, and the ground has to be mowed within a half an inch. And in other words, you have to behave like a high status citizen. Well, those rules, those HOA rules, were made primarily in the 70s to keep people from having rusty cars in the front yard, to give the illusion that this is a high status neighborhood. And I understand that. Humans are all about status. But those rules were made without thinking about the degree to which we've converted the earth to high status communities and the ecological impacts of doing that. So we're not going to be slobs about this. The lawn we maintain is going to be manicured. We're just going to have more plants in our yards, and we have to infiltrate HOAs and get them to understand the ecological consequences of those rules so that we're allowed to do that. Okay, finally ending here, we're gonna end the way we started with my buddy E.O. Wilson. The book he wrote in 2016 was called Half Earth. And it's another one of his attempts to try to save life on Earth, our planet's fight for life on Earth. And in Half Earth, his message was very simple. We have to save ecosystem function on half of planet Earth, or it's all going to disappear. And he spent most of the book talking about the science that supports that contention. And then he ended the book. He didn't spend a whole lot of time talking about how we're actually going to do that. How could this be possible? Remember, half the Earth is already in agriculture. So we've got to save ecosystem function in the other half, where we have 7.8 billion people and all of our infrastructure. You know, the Denver airport is twice the size of Manhattan. How are we going to do that? Well, I actually think we can do it. We can realize E.O.'s dream, his half-Earth dream, but we need a new approach to conservation. Let's not touch agriculture at this point. There's a lot we can do with it, but let's just talk about that half where we live and we work and we play. We need a new approach to conservation. We've got to give up the notion that humans and nature cannot coexist together. Forever we've thought that humans are here and nature is going to be someplace else, but we are not going to live together. That's old business. We now have to save nature where we are, where we abound. The UN designates biosphere reserves as places of ecological significance, and I hate that terminology because it suggests there are places on planet Earth with no ecological significance. Not so. Every square inch of the planet has ecological significance, including our yards. including our corporate landscapes, including our roadsides. Roy Dennis is a land manager in England, and he recently said land ownership is more than a privilege, it's a responsibility. And I sure wish I had said that. That is so true. This is planet Earth, and it is covered with the ecosphere, the living portion of the Earth. If this were an egg, the ecosphere would be thinner than the egg shell. That's how small the area that supports life is on planet Earth. And as far as we know, that is all the life in the universe. It's certainly all the life we're ever going to interact is right here on the ecosphere, or the biosphere, I guess that's what we call it. But we've got this idea about private land ownership. So we've divided the biosphere up into private land. So Tom owns this, Dick owns this, Harry owns this, Mary owns this. Okay, but along with that private land ownership comes the responsibility of stewarding all the life in the universe. And I can't think of a more awesome responsibility than that. Who's going to do it? We're going to do it. We can no longer leave conservation to the conservationists. There aren't nearly enough of them. Everybody on the planet requires healthy ecosystems, so everybody on the planet has a responsibility of helping to maintain them. It doesn't mean you have to save biodiversity for a living, but you really can save it where you live. And I like this approach because it empowers each one of us. There are huge environmental issues today, things like climate change. And if I said to you, I want you to do something for climate change, and I'm going to come by tomorrow and measure the impact that you've had, it's not going to happen. No matter what you do, I'm not going to be able to measure it. It's too big a problem. But if I said, I want you to help save biodiversity, and you go out and plant an oak tree, I could stop by tomorrow and measure the impact of that. And you could too. A single individual can be an important part of the conservation effort in the future. And it also shrinks the problem down to something that's manageable for each one of us. Don't think about the entire world's problems. Think about the piece of the earth that you can influence. If you own property, that's it. Worry about that property. If you don't own property, 82% of us live in cities and don't own a lot of property, then volunteer in a park or preserve near you. And do the things we've talked about. Shrink the lawn, put in a pollinator garden, get rid of the invasive species, and use those keystone plants just on the piece of the earth you can influence. And we'll be 85.6% done in the US. So as property owners, or as volunteers, each one of us has the power, and we certainly have the responsibility to fix dead landscapes like this. Whether or not we choose to do so is going to determine the fate of nature and our own fate in the future. Collectively, we truly are nature's best hope. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
You're welcome.
Okay, so we're going to start with some questions here. Let's see. Okay, we have our first question comes from Frida, and she is asking, are native birds eating any non-native insects like viburnum leaf beetle?
Native birds do eat non-native insects when they meet the appropriate criteria. Birds in general don't like hairy caterpillars. So our birds typically avoid gypsy moth or what's the other one? My brain's fried at this point. But so if it's hairy, they don't care if it's native or not. They won't touch it. But I have seen bluebirds in my yard rear entire clutches on non-native sawflies, which they produce caterpillar-like creatures. So they don't care as long as it's something that's edible. Viburnum leaf beetle is, birds in general don't eat a lot of beetles. So right away, they're not going to do a great job on those. But, you know, we've got spotted lanternfly down here now. I've seen birds eat them twice so far. So, you know, a little help there. I've seen them eat brown marmorated stink bug. Those don't seem like great food items to me, but I have seen them eat them. So yeah, there's some bird control of some of these guys.
Okay. Joanne asks again about a little bit about gypsy moths. I've seen lots of gypsy moths and their eggs this year. Is this good or bad?
Well, it's not good. You know, of course, gypsy, when I say we want insects and we want caterpillars, I mean native insects and native caterpillars. We do not want anything from someplace else because we bring these creatures in without their natural controls. We brought gypsy moth here in the late 1800s and without any of its parasitoids or its diseases. So when it escaped, it became a huge problem. Nothing was controlling it. And that is true for hemlock, woolly adelgid, and for Asian longhorn beetle and emerald ash borer, and all these guys that are devastating our native plants. So we don't want any non-native insects. Gypsy moth, of course, is a huge problem, and there's a good control for gypsy moth. It's a fungus that came here on its own, but it only outbreaks when you have a rainy season. So it likes lots of moisture. We had a lot of moisture down where I live this year, and probably for the last 10 years, we've been really, really wet. We have no gypsy moths at all. But you guys up north have been dry, and gypsy moths love that. The fungus doesn't break out, so they tend to go crazy. And that's a big quandary. They're hitting oaks very hard. And if they defoliate an oak 2 or 3 years in a row, it does kill it. So what do? If you spray the oak, you kill the gypsy moth, but you temporarily at least save the oak. And that's what I would do. I would want to control the gypsy moth because the oak can be there for 300 years. You don't want to lose a big old oak, even though you're going to sacrifice what's on that oak tree that year.
Okay, terrific. Janet asks, bee hotels, what size diameter holes should be drilled, or doesn't it matter?
Well, it matters for particular species of bees. So you should vary the size. I mean, if you actually know the species of bees that are trying to use your yard, then you can make it an appropriate hole. But about 3/8 inch is a good general hole, and a lot of bees will use that. But there are some native bees that are quite tiny, so you can put in some smaller holes. Fewer of them are large. Of course, the carpenter bee makes its own holes. It's not going to use an existing hole. That's the largest native bee. So I would go with 3/8 inch and let the bees work it out.
Okay. Frida has another question. My neighbor has a light display so bright I can see it 4 blocks away. He loves it. He has it on from dark till 10 or 11 at night all year round. He also has a garden with absolutely no native plants. We don't talk all that much. Is there any way to get through to someone like this?
I have an excellent Christmas present for your neighbor. Give him a copy of my book. It's exactly why I write these books, to expose these people to the harm that they don't even think about it. They don't realize what they're doing. There's one good thing about him turning his lights off at 11, and that is that an awful lot of our night flying insects don't come out till after midnight. So there's a little bit of good there, but he's got to increase the use of native plants. What I'm hoping we're going to do is reach a threshold where that becomes the most common type of landscape, and then people will start to do it simply because their neighbors are doing it. It's what's happened with big lawns in the West. We've reached a water crisis to the point where the guy with the big lawn in the West is no longer the role model. He's now the pariah because everybody knows that's a huge waste. So I want to get to the point where the all non-native landscape is viewed as a biological desert, and we just can't afford that. And believe it or not, we're moving in that direction. We're not at the threshold yet, but we've made a whole lot more inroads in this regard than actually I ever thought we would. So,
great. Okay. John has asked, what insect and bird species are threatened by the large-scale loss of ash trees across the Northeast and Midwest U.S.? And what are the best species to plant in their place to maintain species that were used by the ash?
Yeah, good question. There are, Dave Wagner did a paper, and I think it's 95 species that use ash. So if ashes really did disappear, we would lose 95 species. And, most of our birds eat a variety of insects. But that's taking a big chunk out, particularly a forest that has a lot of ashes. It's taking a big chunk of the insect biomass that these birds would use. So the most productive plants you can use are on that list I gave you: oaks and native cherries. Willows would be the top 3. Native birches are really high. Aspens are high, but ashes are really valuable trees, and I don't want to write them off. I'm involved in a biocontrol program bringing in parasitoids that hit the emerald ash borer both as eggs and as larvae, and there's some promise here. There's some promise. There are actually ash groves in Michigan, which was ground zero for the emerald ash borer, where these parasitoids are making, they're like 60–70% mortality for the emerald ash borer. So I think in the long run, we're going to get to a point where some resistance in the trees meets the biocontrol programs that we're working on now, and we won't lose all of our ashes. But what we should not do is bring in Chinese ashes, which people are saying, because they're resistant to the emerald ash borer. Of course they are, they evolved together. But Chinese ashes won't support the ash insects that we need to support. It's not simply a matter of having the tree there. It's got to be a functional tree. So what we need to do is what we didn't do with the American chestnut. When we had the chestnut blight, we saw that the chestnuts were dying, so the loggers took out every last one of them. They said they're going to die anyway, and they wiped them out. So we lost the opportunity to see the 1 or 2% that might have been resistant to the chestnut blight. I don't want to do that with the ashes. I want to, there will be some resistance, and we need to take advantage of that. So yes, we want to replace the trees that are dead, but we don't want to give up hope for the ashes. And if you have an ash that is still alive, don't cut it down preventively. I mean, maybe you've got that 1% that's going to make it.
Well, hopefully that answered Ruth's question. She had a very similar question. So we'll go to Janet. Doug mentioned that sunny areas are good for plants for pollinators, but if we have shady yards, are there good shade tolerant plants to support pollinators and caterpillars?
Yes. Let's focus on one or the other. It is hard to find plants that are really good for both in the shade. A really good plant that blooms in pretty heavy shade is the native hydrangea arborescens. And it's a wonderful pollinator plant. Some of our viburnums, like Viburnum dentatum, that's getting clobbered by the viburnum leaf beetle, that also will bloom somewhat in the shade. They all do better in the sun. If you get hydrangea arborescens, don't get the cultivar Annabelle, because that has turned a lot of the functional parts of the flower into white bracts that makes it very pretty, but they're sterile. So get the straight species. It's not as showy, but it is much better for the pollinators. It's not a great plant for caterpillars, but that's okay. You're shady because you probably have big trees that are good for caterpillars. So you've got to do both at the same time.
Wonderful. Tom asks, are there opportunities for citizen science to help monitor pollinators in Western New York?
Well, I don't know of any, but I'm not really a pollinator guy. And it's not what I do research on, but there are many people doing that. And I know of programs in Arizona, and I'm not sure where else, but they're scattered around the country. Minnesota, I think, where they do have citizen science efforts to help monitor bees. So I can't answer that question. I don't know what's going on in your area.
Okay, well, maybe that's something that we can look into and help answer that. So
I mentioned Sam Droege. He works at Patuxent Wildlife Research Center. He would know. He would know because he conducts a lot of these citizen science things, and he's got a website. He's easy to find.
And I believe someone shared that earlier. Was that? I don't know if that's, but I think that was shared. So we'll get that out there.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I think someone shared that website.
Lab website. Yes, it's in the chat.
Okay.
And someone also just sent that Journey North is citizen science for monarchs in our area.
Oh, cool. So yes, we will, for everyone out there listening, we will share all that information and get it out there to you. Okay. Janet asked, getting rid of invasive. How important is it to get rid of the herbaceous invasives like Japanese silkgrass, or should we emphasize shrubby invasive? Is there one, which battle do you pick? I'm assuming is she's asking.
Yeah. Well, I pick the battles I can win. And Japanese stiltgrass is not one that I can win. I don't know what to do about that one. That one is just so tough. So the woodies are important because they're bulky. They take up space. They throw a lot of shade, and they push out native woodies. They're also much easier to get rid of. You can cut them off at the base. You have to kill the roots. So you either dig out the roots if you don't want to use any herbicide, or if you just want to use a little bit of herbicide, cut them off at the base and paint the stump. So you're not spraying the world. And it can be very satisfying. You've got these huge piles of bodies that you've pulled out. And it leaves space where natives can come in. You can add natives to your property simply by, we call it addition by subtraction. You're taking out the things you don't want, and that's it. The things you do want will come in on their own. And you always have to monitor those invasives because they come in fast. But it's much easier to pull out a 1-year-old autumn olive than it is a 15-year-old autumn olive.
Absolutely. Let me get down to a question here. Frida had asked again, so if my neighbor's light display is all LEDs, does that make it okay?
It could be. It could be. LED, well, if it's LED yellow light, LED white lights do attract some insects. So get them to switch to yellow lights, and that would be better.
Okay.
But you're saving a lot of energy when you switch to LEDs too. So that's, from an energy perspective alone, that's the thing to do. The very worst is a mercury vapor lamp. Those huge mercury vapor lamps that people put over garages and things. Those are the very worst.
Mary asks, how big an impact are our vegetable gardens and fruit trees / berry bushes? Are there better foods to grow to share with our ecosystem? I know you mentioned pawpaws.
Yeah. We grow vegetable gardens locally for good reasons. We get to control what's on those plants. We don't have to go anywhere to get them. So it's locally grown food, and everybody supports that. So I don't want to say don't do that because it's not great for wildlife. I would say try to work out a compromise where you get to do both. Let me give you a good example of what a good native landscape around a vegetable garden can do for you. A lot of people have trouble with tomato hornworm or tobacco hornworm. It's that sphinx moth that gets on your tomatoes, and then you see the white cocoons on its back. They think it's eggs, but they're really cocoons of a braconid wasp that has already tunneled out the insides of those caterpillars, and they're excellent control. Well, where do those braconids come from? They come from populations of other sphinx moths. At my house, I've got 17 species of sphinx moths. So the parasitoid community is always at my house. And when the tobacco hornworm comes, which is not often, they clobber it right away. So what we have at our house is really good balance. We've got a lot of species, but not great abundance of any of them, because there's so many natural enemies keeping things very low, including those birds. I'm surprised I have any caterpillars at all for all the birds that are eating thousands of them every summer.
Oh my goodness. Cynthia has asked, is there room for some non-native plants like buddleia that is well loved by many butterflies?
Okay, that's another good question. Buddleia is called butterfly bush. So why wouldn't you plant it for butterflies? It is a great source of nectar. It makes a lot of nectar. And some of our generalist bees will go to it to get nectar, and certainly the butterflies do. So people love it, and it's beautiful. On top of that, it does have a serious downside, and that is in more and more places it is becoming invasive. It's escaping. I'm pulling them out of my yard. It's a major invasive species in some restoration projects in Pennsylvania. And a lot of people say, well, I'll go out and deadhead it. Okay, that's good, but the other problem with buddleia is that it makes nectar, but it doesn't make any butterflies. So in order to have a butterfly community, you have to have the host plants that make it. And buddleia doesn't support any Lepidoptera development east of southern Arizona, I think. So, you know, it's kind of one of these in between things. It is beautiful. It's not number one on my hate list, but we do have to be careful with it. We plant it so often that we've got grandchildren in Portland, Oregon, and it is everywhere out there, up and down the railroad tracks. And so it's clearly escaped and now is a huge problem. And eventually, you know, when that happens someplace, it typically happens everywhere eventually. So there are better alternatives that make a lot of nectar. Things like Joe Pye weed. It's a great butterfly plant, makes a lot of nectar, blooms about the same time. Give that a try.
Perfect. Ruth asks or says, my main house is in DC and I have a little postage stamp out front. We live on a total ginkgo street and I inherited a house with a large crepe myrtle out front. Would you just get rid of those crepe myrtle? And if so, what would be good to replace it? But I also planted a dwarf Japanese maple. Not having heard your lecture early enough, would you replace that?
Yeah, these are tough questions. You know, certainly you can replace things through attrition. When something dies, that's a great chance, you know, great timing to pick something else. Things like Norway maple, they become huge trees, and it's a big expense to cut it down. But you know, when the storm comes and blows over, that's the time to put in a new one. There are lots of other alternative blooming plants, none quite as showy as crepe myrtle. I mean, you can get it in any color and it's full of blooms, but things like amelanchier, we've got a couple species of shadbush, that's what I call it. It's a good spring bloomer, and it also is the first plant to make berries that the birds will eat in the summertime. I would consider that. And it doesn't get too big. That would be a good replacement. Hawthorns can be very showy and they make wonderful berries. They're also good replacements, but you know, they're not bright pink or purple or all the other things. So
right.
I don't know.
That is, no, there are so many things that you can use out there besides that are native. So Tom asked, any suggestions for educating the next generation on this topic?
Yeah, everybody says I should go talk in all the schools. That's a very important point. We certainly, you know, the ecological IQ of the U.S. is really, really low because we're not taught about these things from grade school up. It could be woven into our curricula without a whole lot of trouble. And actually, we're a lot better at that now than we were when I went to school, where there was zero. The word ecology wasn't, I mean, I don't even know if it had been invented, but we didn't learn anything about this. And kids do learn a little bit now, but there has been talk about me converting some of the books I've written for grade schools where it can actually be used in a curriculum. And I would like to do that if I could figure out, I'd love to talk to somebody who actually teaches biology in high school and say, what would you actually use? I'd love to see a format that you would actually use. We could make videos and make them part of curricula. You know, they're all things that people tell me I should do, and they're right. I should do it.
Can you, in case something happens with timing and stuff, can you repeat your book titles again? We have lots of people asking again about the names of your books. Doug.
Okay, the first book I wrote in 2007 was Bringing Nature Home, and came out a second edition in 2009. I wrote a book with Rick Dark in 2014 called The Living Landscape. That's more of a how-to book. There's a lot of pictures in there about how to create landscapes that will support life. My latest book is Nature's Best Hope, came out in February of this year. Just 1 week or 2 weeks before the virus hit, and before all my talks were canceled. And then I have so Nature's Best Hope, and then I have a book coming out in next March called The Nature of Oaks. So we'll see how that one goes. But the first 3 are already out, and you can get them in a lot of places. But the cheapest place is Amazon, like always.
Wonderful. No, thank you. And that leads us to another question. What would be a good alternative to planting oaks because oak wilt is in the next county and not recommended?
Yeah. We don't have oak wilt here. We've got oak leaf scorch. And in the West, they've got sudden oak death syndrome. There's a lot of diseases of oaks that have been introduced to this country. Another terrible, terrible thing. Since oaks are you know, they're the kingpin plant in most of our forest ecosystems, we can't afford to lose them. But oak wilt, if I understand it, because we don't have it here, so I don't know that much about it, attacks the white oak group. So in that case, I would focus on the red oak group. You've got a lot of species to work on. So the white oak group includes things like post oak and white oak and swamp white oak, chestnut oak, whereas the red oak group is pin oak and red oak and black oak and turkey oak. Those would be the common ones. Here, we've got oak leaf scorch that hits the red oak group, so we plant a lot of the white oak group, and we're dodging it that way. In both cases, though, not all, it's not like the chestnut blight where it really does wipe out most of them. There's a fair number of oaks that survive these things, and those are going to be the future of our oak generations. Because they're the ones that make the acorns each year. And those are the acorns that the blue jays are dispersing. The sick oaks don't do it anymore. So this is natural selection favoring the oaks with resistance, and they will spread faster than we think. But yeah, I would dodge oak wilt by planting one of the red oak groups.
Okay. Betsy asks, what insects are supported by sugar maples?
Oh, there's a lot. More about, I don't know, 256, something like that species.
Yeah.
You know, things like the prettiest one would be probably the rosy maple moth, which is really pretty, but there's a lot of them. There's a lot of
them. Can you rate the importance of having bat houses? Does it hurt the need for more insects?
Oh, no, bat houses are a wonderful thing. If your bat house is like my house, it's completely empty.
Yeah.
Of course, we have the white nose disease, which has clobbered most populations of northern bats, like the little brown bat, and you know they were almost wiped out. There's some evidence that they're developing resistance at this point and starting to spread again, but our bat populations have been decimated compared to what they were. So we are nowhere close to having too many bats that are going to eat too many insects. I wouldn't worry about that. Put up your bat house. If a bat comes, that'd be great.
Betsy asked, is field grass a mixture of grasses and other plants? No, okay, sorry, a little confusing. Is field grass a mixture of grasses and other plants? No herbicides or pesticides used, helpful for insects?
If you mean is an eastern meadow that has native grasses and forbs and things good for insects? The answer is yes. That it supports a lot of, you know, there's a lot of diversity of plants in a meadow situation like that. And an awful lot of insects that use them. That's where you get a lot of the orthopterans, a lot of the crickets and grasshoppers and katydids that are also really high on actually below caterpillars. That's the next thing that birds eat most often. And a lot of other things eat them as well. But meadows are not easy to make. We get a lot of rain here in the east, and the rain favors woody plants over the grasses, and they always want to come in and change your meadow. So if you want a meadow, it's great, it's ecologically, but it requires constant maintenance, constant disturbance to keep it a meadow. And it's also a prime place for all those invasives to invade. So multiflora rose and autumn olive and bush honeysuckle, all those guys are going to come in, and you have to be vigilant and spot remove them every year. Mowing does not kill those guys because it doesn't kill the roots. They all come up from the roots, and it just gets a bigger and bigger root mass every year.
Right. Yes. Tom asks, what do you say about, I'm going to probably mispronounce this, neonicotinoids?
What do I say about neonics? It's an imidacloprid. You know, we've gone through several generations of pesticides from DDT on, and we find out that there's a downside to each one of them. Then we move to another generation of pesticides. Usually it's that the insects themselves develop resistance to it. The latest generation relies on compounds called imidacloprids, which are systemics. They're taken up by plants and spread to all parts of the plant, and they've been used for years now. But we're finding out that they've got serious downsides. They're not lethal to a lot of insects immediately, but they drive them crazy. So a lot of our bees can't find their way back to the nest, and it turns out that mortality is pretty high with imidacloprids, and they also last a long time in the plant. So Europe has banned imidacloprids for a couple of years now, and we're starting to get the data that will tell us whether that's made a big difference in insect declines. The problem is there's so many other causes that so far it hasn't seemed to make any difference. But we do know that these, you know, they're pesticides. So yes, they kill insects and they last a long time. I think within probably the next 5 years, they'll be banned here as well.
And we have one last question from Kara. She says, my garden has issues with stem borers in zucchini and cucumbers. Any tips on managing them yet not wiping out completely whatever moth laid there?
That's the squash vine borer. It is a native moth, but it is a pest. And from the point where it bores into the stem, it kills that stem on out. Do I have any suggestions? You know, other than in the old days, people would just get out the pesticide 7, and spread it all over the white powder all over their garden and that would work. But then you're kind of drowning in 7. I haven't thought about this lately because I haven't seen a squash vine borer in years, but yeah, I guess there's a poor answer for you. You know, this is where the Google is great. Go in and say, how do I control squash vine borer? And you'll get lots of options. It'll pop right up.
We do actually have, if you don't mind, we have 3 more questions.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
Put in the chat.
That's
in
what
Chautauqua, we have swarms of what I know as lake flies. Do these insects serve any useful purpose so I can stop focusing on what a nuisance they are?
I'll bet you're talking about, there's 2 possibilities. You know what a mayfly is, right? So you're not talking about mayflies. If you're not talking about mayflies, you're talking about chironomids, which can come off by the many millions. They're midges, and they've got fluffy antennae, and they're clouds of them. What can I say about it? Does anything eat them? Yes, some things eat them. When you have a lot of them, it's a sign of an awful lot of nutrients in your lake. It's not a great sign. So when you have giant productions of mayflies too, it's usually a sign of too many nutrients getting into the lake. So it's not a great sign, but they are part of the normal fauna that would be in your lake. So you do want to see them, but there are a lot of them. So if you're worried about swatting them something, I wouldn't. They don't bite. You know, neither one of those bite. If you have something that's biting you, it's probably stomoxys. It's probably stable fly, actually. They can breed in seaweed and things that washes up. They are annoying. Swat them.
And then you talked a little bit about bats, but do you have any plantings that you can add to encourage bats to return?
Well, bats that live this far north are mostly not fruit-eating bats. They're insectivores. So anything that makes night flying insects is going to favor bats. So that's a good reason, for example, to not wipe out all your tent caterpillars or your fall webworms, because they make those ugly tents and nobody likes them, but they're good native insects and they make a lot of adults that fly at night. This is the trade-off. You're feeding the bats to keep them around. But we want to encourage the production of large moths that fly at night, not just for bats, but for all of our poor wills, things like whippoorwill and chuck-will's widow. They've declined like 95% because of the loss of big night flying moths. So putting in those keystone plants is the best thing you can do for bats.
Wonderful. All right, so we are going to have this be the very last question. Another one from Facebook. Lisa wants to know, and this is a big question, but if we want to convert some hard, compacted, mowed lawn to a more natural state, how do we start? Does it need to be aerated? And if so, how?
You know, I used to go around and give a lot of talks, and people go out and say, oh, I'm going to rip out my whole lawn. Don't do that. I would pick at it. And the easiest thing you can do is add a tree. So what you do is you dig a hole, you plant the tree properly. And that means you don't dig a deep hole. The most common problem in planting a tree is having the hole too deep, but you can dig a very wide hole so that the roots can go out easily. That right away is going to break up your compacted soil. If you really are going to take out your whole lawn, there are rippers. You know, a tractor comes along with this hook and it goes down and it can rip the soil down. You get big ones that can go down more than 2 feet, and that gets rid of the compaction right away. But you know, tree roots can break up compaction over time. Having good leaf litter on top of compacted soil encourages a lot of soil arthropod activity, which breaks up compaction. So compaction will break up naturally over time if you stop the source of the compaction, which is usually heavy mowers or farm equipment mowing at or tilling at a certain level for decades can create compaction. But I would start by adding the trees you're going to start and breaking it up locally, and then those tree roots will go out and they themselves will break up the compaction over time.
All right. All right. Well, it has definitely gotten dark on me here.
It has. Yeah.
You called it.
I did.
But thank you so much, Dr. Tallamy, for your time and your wisdom. We so appreciate it. And thank you to all of you at home for joining us. And we hope that you'll take this knowledge and you know, even if it's just planting one tree, we hope that you go out and do something with it. The Chautauqua Watershed Conservancy, this is what we're trying to strive for every day. If you need help getting started, Lisa, or anyone else, our Lakescapes program is a great way to do that. Carol is still seeing people, and the fall is a great time to plant for a beautiful spring garden. She will come right out, and it's a free program. She'll look at your yard with you, plan with you, talk about options, and whether it's a rain garden, a buffer, or just getting some more native plants out there. She's great, and we are happy to help you do that. And lastly, you know, we aren't able to do what we do without all of you. It's through the generous support of families, individuals, family foundations. So if this already includes you, thank you so much for your support. You're supporting really, really important work. And if you would like to learn more about us or join this group of supporters, you can find more information at our website, chautauquawatershed.org, which I included in the chat. Or you're welcome to give us a call. Call our office anytime. I've also included our phone number there. So with that, thank you all. And we hope that you will keep an eye out on our Facebook page for future events this fall, and have a great rest of your evening.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Night.